Hello everyone. Hello my lifelong learners. Happy midweek. This is our midweek power hour and it is time to get our learn on. Let me ask you this. You saw my title for today, boundaries. Do you need to say yes or no more often? So now tell me if any of these scenarios sound familiar to you. You're so great at creating these graphics. Can you take care of mine? You know I have that big deadline coming up and it's my sister's wedding this weekend, so I can't really do it. Or how about this one? You've worked weekends before, right? I know you don't mind doing that again. Kind of sneaking little things in there. Or how about these thoughts? If I say no, they're not going to like me, approve of me, think highly of me. Insert whatever thought comes to mind for you. Or how about this one? I just can't let them down. If you're here listening to this, I have a very sincere feeling that these sound extremely familiar to you, and you probably can come up with tons of stuff on your own. So I want to say hello and welcome those of you that are joining me live today for this critical and important conversation. I mean, throughout the week as I've been preparing, talking to people, I have to tell you, people are continuously letting me know that this is a huge and very, very serious and important topic. So feel free to use the chat and let me know what your responses are, what your thoughts are as you're thinking through these. And before we finish up for today, I am going to post in the chat all of the links to the sources that I will talk about. So I'll be sure to do that as well. Now, I do have to give you a bit of a disclaimer, and that is that when it comes to boundaries, I'm not talking about them because I've got it all figured out or everything is 100% working well in my own life, but I have done a lot of hard work and I want to be able to share that with you. I want you to grow and benefit from putting healthy boundaries in place, because the truth is they really do bring some extremely awesome feelings, experiences, senses into your life, which we are going to talk about today. Alrighty, thank you so much everyone for your comments here. Hello, I want to say hi to Ben. I want to say hi to Taste the Speaker, which is Rudy. Glad to have you with me. I really appreciate it. All right, so let's launch into the content and then I'll come back to comments and we'll post about those and I'll share those. So the first thing I want to tell you is that when I did a search for the word boundaries, I got 1,240,000,000 results. So that is a lot of content. And I will say, in a way, I was so happy because that means people are talking about it. There's so much information out there on it. On the other hand, it makes it hard to know what to concentrate and focus on. Then when I refined that search a bit to boundaries in relationship, I got 655 million. So less, but still so much. And again, honestly, I really felt that that was a good thing. So before we launch, let's kick it off with some definitions. The first that I want to clarify is, what do I mean by a yes person versus a no person? Now, the question for today was, do you need to say yes more often or no more often in your own life? And let me just say that what I don't mean by a yes person is, I don't mean what Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines as a yes man. So a yes person, the person who says yes without thinking, without considering their feelings, more like a lackey or a minion. I don't mean that. Nor do I mean a no person who is continuously negative, unavailable, depressed, disconnected. I'm not talking about those extreme situations. When I say yes versus no, I want you to think about, is it easy in your life to say yes to people? Is it easy to say no? Now, what I know about most of you is that most of you struggle saying no and very often say yes. And I totally get that myself, because there's a test called the 5-factor model, or the Big Five, that measures people's levels in different areas, their personalities. One of them is, how open are you to experiences, right? Your level of openness to new experiences. And for the record, I want you to know that I'm a 96% open to new experiences out of 100. So I'm highly open to new experiences, and you might be too. And that's why yes comes easily to you. So it'd be even more important in that case to learn when and how to say no. Some of you, no comes very easily, and you might feel like you already have healthy boundaries, but some of you might be saying no out of fear. And that's what I want you to really think about today. I would like you to not be making decisions out of fear, but rather intentional decisions more from a place of love, consciousness, and awareness. So I wanted to clarify what I mean by that. The second definition that I want to clarify is what exactly is a boundary? So let me clarify. There's a couple of books I want to talk to you about. The first one is one by Anne Catherine, and she defines a boundary as a limit or an edge that defines a person as separate from another. And then the second book is called Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, which I also want to just let you know ahead of time that the authors, Townsend and Cloud, are Christian authors. So just so that you're aware as I refer to that resource. They talk a lot about the psychological side of boundaries, but it is also from their Christian perspective. Now, in their book, they use the analogy of a property line. So let's have a look here. So imagine these two property lines here, right? One is my property, one is your property. This is how they describe boundaries. It's very clear to me what is mine and what is yours. So let's say the one on the left is mine, and on my property, I want a house. And I'm going to throw in a garage too, because I've never had a garage and I would really like one. I'm going to throw in a round door, a circular driveway. I'm also going to have an area over here for food and fun and friends and family to come over. Okay, and then what would you like on your property? You know, Rudy, let me know what's something that you would like on your property. And I'm thinking maybe you want a very large barn for some storage space over here. You know, maybe you want to throw some motorcycles in here. You can see that I cannot draw, but pretend that's a motorcycle, guys. And let's say, you know, maybe you want to throw in this beautiful garden of flowers in here. The idea is this belongs to me. This belongs to Rudy. All right. Oh, and Rudy wants a reading garden. Awesome. And a man cave. Gotcha. Beautiful things to add in here. Yes, yes. So here we're going to put a nice big man cave over here. And we're going to add a reading garden here for your books. So now here's what we mean by boundaries. When we have these property lines, it's very clear what's my responsibility and what's Rudy's responsibility, right? It's not Rudy's responsibility to come into my property and fix my driveway, nor is it my responsibility to come into Rudy's property and update his man cave, right? These are separate things. We each are responsible for our own things, and that is exactly the same way that boundaries work. So this metaphor, the property lines, is very helpful to me in understanding that. Now, I just want to clarify that there's a little bit of confusion or just something for you to think about when it comes to rules and boundaries. All right, we might have some rules, but they're not exactly boundaries, but they are connected and related. Here's an example. You know, I teach at a university, so I have a rule in my classroom about use of devices like laptops and cell phones, which I allow. But if a person is distracted by them, I call their attention to it. So the rule is use your device as long as it's not a distraction. If it's a distraction, you need to put it away. So I have had to talk to students about that. And I have different levels. Level 1 is I'll just talk to you and ask you a question to bring your attention back to the class. If that doesn't work, I'll come by and just gently tap you on the shoulder. Everybody knows that's the nonverbal communication for, hey, come on back, I see you distracted. And the third thing is I will flat out just say, put your laptop away or your phone away or whatever. So then the rules are there, and then the boundary comes in when I enforce that rule. But it's always their choice, right? It's more of the if then. If you continue to be distracted by the device, then you will need to put it away. So that's a little bit of explaining about the way that rules and boundaries work. Now, the beauty of having this is that when we have clear boundaries, we have ownership, we have choice, we have freedom. I mean, it is absolutely unbelievable the benefits of having healthy boundaries in our lives. So now, what happens in our lives when we don't have the boundaries? Well, the opposite, right? We can be tired, we can be frustrated, we can be overwhelmed. You know, in the best case scenario, we're drained, we're empty, but in the worst case scenario, everybody, really bad things can happen. You can end up in, your mental health is compromised, your physical health is compromised. You can end up in relationships with other people that are toxic, that are harmful, that are detrimental to you. So it's really important that we work on boundaries, and that is today's conversation. So one last thing about the property line analogy here is that we have an internal gut check, right? Some systems in ourselves that help us. And it's kind of like an alarm on the property line. Now, we do sometimes have false alarms. People are coming in with good intentions, or we weren't expecting them, but sometimes people are trespassing in areas that they shouldn't. So keep this property line in mind as we talk through them. Now that I've clarified a bit more about what I mean by yes or no, I'd like to know, what do you think you need to say yes or no? Right? What is it exactly for you? Do you need to say yes more often? Do you need to say no more often? So let me know in the chat what you think about that. And thank you, Rudy, for the comment that you are loving the artwork, and we'll come back around to some of your questions, because I do see that you're bringing up some great points about shared areas, right? So that we can address as well. Okay, and if Rudy, for you, you're saying that you absolutely need to be able to say no more often. And as I prepared for today, talking to other people, they very much feel the same way, where they really had to learn to say no, where they feel like they need to learn to say no more often. Also for Ben, learning to say no for sure is another thing you need to add in there. Terrific. So whether you're here joining us live or catching this on the replay, think about this, right? Your answer will probably come to you top of mind immediately, and you'll know. So that's our first point, clarifying some definitions. Let me head over to our second point, and I want to talk to you now about 6 different types of boundaries. The first type is a physical type, right? The one that's very easy to see. This is about physical space, our body, our personal space, right? How much personal space are you okay with? Even things like public displays of affection, like, are you okay with public displays of affection? Are you okay with them with only certain people? So physical is the first one. Here's an example. Let's just say, imagine that you're on a first date with somebody and you're just meeting them. And when they say hello, they greet you, but then they start rubbing your back. Now, I don't know about y'all dating lives, but for my dating life, that would not be okay, right? That would be inappropriate. They would be in my personal space. That's not an okay type of physical touch. So no second chance for Mr. Way Too Soon back rubber person, right? That is not going to happen. So that's physical space. And even in the classroom, like meeting new people, I am a hugger. And those of us who are huggers, we always say that, like, I'm a hugger, but I know not everyone else is. So I need to ask and obtain permission. Will I hug a person? Are you okay with a hug? And then obviously with COVID in our lives, and we've had a lot of distancing and experiences with that, but being aware who we are and how other people might perceive that is really important to maintaining healthy relationships. So that's the first one, physical. Now the second one is sexual boundaries, and this is what we consider to be okay in our personal intimacy in our sexual lives. And this one is about what we give consent to. Now, with the CDC reporting that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys experience child sexual abuse, I really didn't feel right not mentioning this or ignoring the fact that many of us, and I will share with you, myself included, experience this type of boundary violation. So I share this with you. I know it's a serious matter, and I'm hoping that by speaking up about it, it can help you know you're not alone and that healing is possible. But this definitely is a type of boundary that is extremely connected to our mental health and has implications, lifelong implications. So the second one is sexual. Now let's head over to the third one, which is a material boundary. Material boundaries are about our belongings, our possessions, and our money, our finances. So material things can come into play when someone asks us for money or to borrow something, and we are either not comfortable with that or we don't think it's a good idea, or we flat out don't want to do it. So the third one is about our belongings, and you might be thinking, how much can I afford to give? How much do I want to give? As we come up on the holiday season, and you might be participating in things like Secret Santa or white elephant gifts or things at work, setting some limits. Or myself, when I was going through a period of really working on saving and reducing debt, I had to say no to a lot of that for that season in my life. So material boundaries about our money, our resources, and our belongings. The fourth one is time and energy. Now, with time and energy, right, the word workaholic comes to mind for me. Don't know if some of you have maybe struggled with that as well, as definitely a part of my own past. But when I was in my workaholic days, I would have friends contact me to say, I know you're really busy, but that was always the first thing that came out of their mouths. It's almost as if they had to qualify asking for some of my time because I never really had it available for them because I prioritized working so much. I even had a friend once ask me, why are you always in such a rush? And then I got the message through many areas of my life that I needed to learn to be still. And as I learned to be still, to have less stress, less craziness, take good care of myself, I slowed down. And then I had a colleague come by who was still in the midst of all of that craziness himself. And I realized in that moment, that used to be me. That's what I used to be like. And it helped me realize how much growth I'd made in that area as well. So this might come to mind for you. Do you have a hard time saying no at work or making commitments, right? Your calendar, your energy, you might feel exhausted. And here you also have to consider who you are as a person. An introvert, an extrovert, right? And what energizes you and what drains you, and really knowing how to take good care of yourself. And it comes back again to when we say yes and when we say no. So time and energy is the fourth one. Next up, we have spiritual boundaries. And this is about people's faith, their beliefs, and their morality. In my first job after graduate school, I met a man for the first time, and we had a conversation in a group. And at the end of the conversation, I shook everybody's hand and I went to shake his hand as well, but he did not accept my handshake. I was very confused and very lost. What I found out afterwards is that some people in Orthodox Jewish faiths, in his particular segment of the faith, is that men do not touch women who are not their spouse or their immediate family members. Now, I didn't know that. I learned that day. I do wish that he had taken advantage of the opportunity to educate me about that and to explain when I reached out why, but perhaps he didn't feel comfortable anyway. Now I know, and that is a spiritual boundary, spiritual practice that I respect of a different faith. And the last one, save the best for last, is relational boundaries. And relational boundaries are kind of segmented into multiple parts here, where relational boundaries involve our emotions, our intellect, our thoughts, right? The intellectual part of ourselves, as well as the words that we allow people to speak to us, how we allow people to treat us and speak to us. So when it comes to relational boundaries, I recently heard something that I think is very important, and that is that we can care without having to carry things. And I love that. So see if that makes sense for you. We can care, but we don't have to carry. In a book by Dave Ramsey called Entree Leadership, he gives this example of somebody comes into your office or into your life, into your screen with a problem. Imagine that problem, that issue is like a monkey that they're bringing on their shoulder. So you can have them in your office, but when they leave, make sure that they take that monkey with them. If you don't, pretty soon your office will be full of monkeys and you will be running a chaotic zoo. So that has always stuck with me in my own mind. So making sure that people, if they come to me with a problem, I can be there for them, right? I can care, but then they have to take that out with them. They can't leave it with me. Coming back again to our sense of boundaries. So those are a couple things to keep in mind when it comes to that. Another type of relational boundary issue that I've experienced in my own life, and I'd be curious for you guys to share, what are some of the examples or experiences that have come up for you? Anything that you're comfortable sharing. Another one for me is people making comments about my weight. And it happened many times, but one particular example, I was young, and maybe I was about 20 years old, and I was visiting my grandmother. And I was going to go run some errands for her, and there was a woman across the street who I'd known for a while, and I said, "Would you like me to grab you anything while I'm out running errands?" She ignored my question and instead said, "Every time I see you, when you come visit your grandmother, you're just getting fatter and fatter and fatter." I was completely shocked. Completely shocked. I actually was speechless. One of the few times in my life when I did not have something to say. But my grandmother had heard, and I didn't know she had. She came out of her front door and said, "Hey, leave her alone. She is perfectly beautiful the way that she is." So she spoke for me. I was so shocked. I ran inside my grandmother's house and I started crying. It was such an overwhelming insult and such an inappropriate step on my own boundaries that it was just really, I was completely jarred. But my grandmother, she spoke for me. Now, she's no longer here, she passed on, but today I can use what she taught me to speak up for myself, right? I would not allow anybody to speak to me that way. So I know for many of you, that can happen as well, right? People are making inappropriate comments about you that just are not right. Another example is at work, at a previous job, there was a person who was making jokes that I wasn't comfortable with. They had a sexual undertone and I just didn't feel right about them. And I mentioned it to him and I said, when you come here, please don't make those jokes. They make me feel uncomfortable. If you continue to make the jokes, I'm going to walk away. And he stopped. He stopped making those jokes and he apologized for it. So that was a win situation where I was able to speak up and get the work relationship to be much, much more appropriate. So I'm sure that you can come up with many examples of relational types of boundaries in your own lives as well. The other point about boundaries that I want you to think about and learn is that boundaries can be rigid, porous, or healthy. And if the boundary is rigid, it's more like a brick wall. If the boundary is porous, it's softer. It's more like just a doormat that can be stepped on. But when they're healthy, right, they're strong and flexible. So this is our goal, is to have healthy boundaries, not to be so rigid that nothing gets in. Because yes, a brick wall protects us, but it also doesn't allow anything to come in. And we need those good things to come into our lives as well. Rather than fear-based thinking and always saying no. Or people-pleasing thinking, porous thinking, and always saying yes. We're going to become doormats. People will walk all over us, and that is not what I want for your life for sure. Focusing on healthy boundaries, this is the key, right? This is the part of the conversation today. So these are the 6 types of boundaries that I want to share with you. And again, in this power hour, we can't cover everything, but I want you to begin to think about these things for your own life. Now let's head over to our next point, which is How do boundaries develop? It will come as no surprise to you that boundaries develop in our childhood. And I'm not sure if you can hear my doggy howling over here, but it's a rainy day, so I think he just needs to get a little bit of that howl out in him. Not sure if that's coming through the microphone or not. But boundaries develop from the time we're born. Our parents, the people that raised us, they're continuously modeling boundaries and teaching us, even ourselves, like little babies explore. So it's important to recognize, where you've come from. And I want to share with you, this is little me, right? So you start to learn about boundaries as you grow up. Think in your own life, in your own experience. Did you learn at all about boundaries? Did you at all think about this growing up? Was it mentioned to you? Was the word boundary even discussed in your own lives? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I know for myself, it was not. And in that book that I mentioned, the first book, Anne Catherine, a book about boundaries, it's called Where I Begin and Where You End, something like that. I will put it in the chat to make sure I've got that title right. But the author is Anne Catherine. She says that we learn about boundaries by the way we're treated as children. And then we teach others where our boundaries are by the way we let them treat us. So this is a cycle, right? This and something that we can observe in our families, where we came from, who raised us. Now, what about if you grew up in a family with a bit of dysfunction? And Rudy, I see you're in the chat commenting about you're working on some boundaries with food, right? That's a real one. I know you said LOL, but that's a real boundary that some people are putting in. You bring up a great point that sometimes these boundaries are with others and sometimes these boundaries are with ourselves. So we might think about them in both of those contexts, with other people and even with ourselves. What about if you grew up in a family where you experienced some dysfunctions? Boundaries may be blurred, or you may be realized that boundaries weren't in place where they should have been. This certainly was the case for me growing up. My family was dealing with alcoholism. My father's alcoholism. He is sober today, thank God, and we have the best relationship we've ever had. But growing up, we had traumatic experiences based around this. And for the most part, there were no boundaries because our family was in survival mode. We just needed to get through this. And when you're in survival mode, these healthy communication things, unfortunately, quite sadly, don't exist, right? Don't exist at all. So, for me, I had to learn. And the most important thing that growing up in that environment taught me is that I can control no one but myself. Again, my property, no one else's. My thoughts, my actions, my behaviors, my responses are my responsibility. I am not responsible for anyone else's choices, but also I can't make anyone do, think anything. That is always their choice. Doesn't matter if I beg, plead, write, sing, how good or bad I am, how much I do, how much I give. It's always another person's choice, their responsibility, not mine. So that is one of the top lessons that I learned when it comes to understanding how boundaries developed for me. Now, these principles are not unique to people in my situation who grew up with addiction or other types of dysfunctions in their family. This is very true for every single one of us, regardless of our family history. We cannot control anyone. And in a way, it's very freeing to make that concept real in your own mind. Because sometimes we think, but I can change that person. I'll be the one that changes them. I can make a difference. And yes, we can make a difference. But here's an example from students in my own classroom, for example. I, as their professor, can't want them to be more successful in the classroom than they want to, right? It's their experience, it's their studies, it's their grades, They have to want it. I can't want it more than they do, right? That would be an unhealthy boundary. So lots for us to think about. One other key area for you to think about is that it's important for us to note that boundaries have some cultural nuance. Here's a couple examples in my own life. I was at an Indian celebration and there were a lot of people there, and people were in line and they were so physically close to each other and to me, and people were kind of pushing each other back and forth, but it was completely normal. Nobody was upset by that. It was very unusual for me. I'm used to a lot more personal space. Another example is I was doing videos for a wedding back in the day, and it was so interesting that I was allowed to, in fact, I was encouraged to be at the front with the priest, with the celebrants, with the bride and groom, inches away from everything that was happening. I was the one that was uncomfortable in that, versus a different church that I'd been to where I was given a rule that I couldn't be within 20 feet of the front of the room. So again, anytime we're thinking about boundaries, realize that they're very unique to you, your life experiences, your individual circumstances, situations, past pains, but they also have some cultural context, right, that we need to be aware of as we're navigating these concepts. Okay, so now, boundaries are awesome when they are healthy, right? We established that. Our goal is to have healthy boundaries. Vanessa Van Edwards from The Science of People says that these empowering borders protect us from being used, drained, or manipulated by others. So if we allow them, all of these situations, all of these losses, they can be lessons for us. People who have come into our lives can help us grow to become better. But how exactly do we go about setting up boundaries for ourselves? Let me give you my fourth point here. My fourth and final point for this live is some tips for you to create boundaries. My first tip is to do what you're doing here today. Learn, listen, read, check out the resources I mentioned, but also I mentioned that there's like a gabillion ones online as well, right? On TikTok, on Instagram, on every social media platform, you can find some great content about boundaries. And I know not all of it is going to resonate with you, and that's okay. You might also want to seek out a mental health professional that can help you to be able to talk about some of these things. I think that that's a great idea. I myself started counseling when I was a senior in college, and my only regret is that I did not start sooner. So I find that speaking to a mental health professional has given me tremendous, tremendous value. And I'm always learning, listening, lifelong learner here, right? You know that, as I practice these concepts myself. So the first one, get out there, right? Do the hard work, explore. We've got to work through and unpack our crappy pasts. We have to give space, voice, time, and place to really work through some of those things. We don't want to get involved in messages of shame and secrecy that are only going to hold us down, right? So being able to name some of those things that we might have experienced as traumatic or blurred boundaries growing up will really help lay this path forward for some freedom for you moving forward around boundaries. That's my first tip. Secondly, once you've gotten some clarity, explored your own core values, and think through what are your boundaries, then you can really speak with intention. Then when you say yes, it's a real yes. It's a strong yes. When you say no, it's a no, right? You have clarity and you can speak with more authority and confidence as you are expressing your boundaries. You'll learn to ask for the things that you need and want in your relationships. And of course, I do believe most people are kind and considerate and aren't going to take advantage and just ask, or want without giving, right? Most of us actually give too much. So I know that it is this balance between taking good care of ourselves and being there and showing up for other people as well. But speaking with intention, having the language, I hope today you've actually learned some language that will help you have more clarity as you lay out boundaries for yourself. The third thing is what we all have to do a bit more of is self-care. And just remember that taking good care of yourself is not selfish. I've been traveling in airplanes since I was less than 1 year old, and I never quite understood that message that the air flight attendants would tell us about put your mask on first before helping others. In my mind, that never made any sense. I was like, no way, I will help other people first. What if I'm with someone older than me who needs that more? What if I'm with someone younger who needs that? And then it hit me as I practiced self-care. I can't help other people if I don't take really good care of myself first. My oxygen mask comes on first so that I can then help other people. So that principle really landed with me in my adulthood. So self-care, what does self-care mean for you? What are the ways that you want to be able to engage and take awesome care of yourself? And I'd love any of you listening to throw in some of your favorite self-care tips. What are the things that you love to do for yourself to take good care? Now, our fourth tip is to seek great models. Like, who are the people that you can find in your own life or even in virtual mentors who really truly model excellent self-care? I can remember a time when a person in a church that I used to belong to asked me to get involved in this amazing project. And I said yes immediately. I was like, I don't need to think about it. I'm in. This project is fantastic. And he said to me, you don't need to give me an answer right now. Take a day to think about it and let me know. If your answer is still yes tomorrow, come on board. But take some time to think about it because it is a big commitment. He taught me something very important. And this is a great tip for those of you who struggle with saying no sometimes or too quickly say yes. Give yourself 24 hours. Even if you're super excited and you think this is wonderful and fantastic, follow this 24-hour rule and say, that sounds amazing. Very excited to learn more about it. Let me think about it and I'll get back to you tomorrow. Because when you go home and you have some time alone with your own thoughts, typically it's in the shower, great thoughts come. You're like, what was I thinking? I can't do that. There's too much going on. Then giving yourself that little bit of grace, that grace period before you give a final answer is very helpful and has been very, very helpful to me. So seek out people who model great boundaries so that you can learn from them and emulate them. You want to be able to put those things into practice. Brene Brown is a great resource. She talks in depth about healthy boundaries and trust. There's a great talk that she does with an acronym called the VAULT about trust. And I think that really comes into play in healthy relationships too. So you might want to check out some of her sources. Daring Greatly is a great book. She talks about many different concepts in there. So seek out great models, whether they're virtual or real in your own lives or even online. Like I said, social media, there's so much rich content out there now too. The fifth one might be harder for everybody. And the fifth one is when a boundary is crossed, right? You've spoken about it, you've made it clear, but when it is crossed, you do have to enforce the consequences. I mean, let's take parenting as an example. Let's imagine that there's one parent who's more of a disciplinarian and one parent who's a little bit more easygoing or lax about the rules. That child knows very young which parent they can get away with things from and which one they cannot, because the more lax parent probably does not enforce the consequences as much as the more disciplinarian parent does. So it's very much the same way, for us. We have to be able to enforce those rules. Otherwise, if we don't, people aren't going to take them seriously, right? Then the risk is that our boundaries are going to become porous. And if that keeps happening, we get into that concept of where we're just going to be a doormat. And again, that is not what I want for you. That is not the kind of life that I believe is healthy and that we should be living. So, although it may be difficult, we do need to enforce the consequences. And remember this, people may not like it at first when you put in a consequence, especially if you're not used to doing that with them. They're not used to you doing that in the past. Some people, when they've had too much of a good thing in their lives like sugar or caffeine, and they need to put an end to that, they might go through some symptoms of withdrawal. This is similar to that. People at first might be throwing some shade at you or not liking what you have to say, they might need some time to adjust. But the people that love you and care for you, even if they have some resistance to it or taken back by or they don't like it, those who truly have your best interest at heart will come around, will ask questions, will want to try to understand and work it out. Now that's different from a more toxic person who is manipulative, who will use guilt and shame or make you feel badly about or criticize you for expressing yourself. And again, if you're coming at this from a place of love, the people that love you will be receptive. Just remember that they might need some time to adjust if you're putting in new boundaries that weren't there before. Also, you yourself might not react favorably to enforcing the consequences of the boundaries. It might not feel good for you to do either. When I was first doing my own boundary work and putting in some boundaries, I shared about the alcoholism growing up, and in those difficult moments when I first started to put in some boundaries, I felt like a bad daughter. I did, I have to tell you. I felt like a bad person, like I was letting people down. But I stuck to them, and the freedom, the peace, and like I said, I have the best relationship with my dad that I've ever had now. And healthy boundaries are in place. And I know it's because of those and because we were both willing to put in the hard work of working through those experiences growing up. So just know this is not going to be a smooth sailing process, especially not in the beginning, but stick with it so that you can have that freedom, that tremendous sense of self, and really being able to take good care of yourself. That is the 5th tip. And lastly, the 6th tip is that you have to remember that this is a process that takes time. Hopefully today you have learned some new things, some great ideas, some concepts for you to start to work through, or maybe you've been doing a little bit of boundary work exploration already and you want to take this to the next level. Just remember, it's going to take some time, right? And some back and forth and some trial and error, and you're going to need to have some self-compassion and some empathy for other people as you navigate these things. So keep this in mind. People can only meet us as far as they've been willing to meet themselves. Everyone is on a different journey. If you're the kind of person who's really working on their emotional intelligence skills and they're building up, not everyone else in your life may have done that same amount of work. So try to meet people where they're at, giving them some patience, right? Try to be patient as you work through this. Like nothing is going to happen immediately, right? I mean, I shared with you that I started counseling in my senior year of college. If my counselor had talked to 22-year-old me the way that they can talk to 45-year-old me now, it wouldn't have worked because I'm in a very different place. So we have to remember part of emotional intelligence is trying to understand another person's point of view as well. So allow that to be a part of the conversation. Give yourself some grace and some compassion. You might not get it all right away. I know I did not, right? It took learning, it took putting all these tips into practice. And there are lots of other things that you can do. And again, I'm not here because I've got all the answers. I'm here because these are the things that have really helped me, and I wanted to be able to share this message with you. So I hope that you have found this conversation today healthy as you begin to work on your own healthy boundaries. In summary, we talked today about some definitions, getting clear on yes versus no, and what exactly is a boundary. Then we talked about these 6 different types of boundaries with some examples and some personal stories, and probably lots of stories would come to mind for you as well as you hear about the different ones. Also how boundaries develop starting from our childhood, and they continue to develop throughout our lives, right? It's a fluid, ongoing process. And then lastly, I talked about some tips for you to start to create boundaries or to continue to create those boundaries if it's a journey that you are working on. What's my invitation for you this week? This week, I want you to start with one person, one situation, one boundary. It can even be a small one. Like it might be a boundary with yourself. But do the exploration and practice just one at a time as you're learning, as you're growing, getting stronger in this area. Now, as we close out for today, thank you for joining me. Our next show next week, Wednesdays, 12 noon Eastern Time, live. We're going to talk about the friendships, specifically the value and importance of strong male friendships. I'm going to share an interview that I did with two men who talk about the importance of friendship. And I myself grew up with 3 brothers, and I think that it's such a valuable and important thing to be able to talk about friendships from the male perspective. So hopefully you can join me for that next week. And if you're curious about how I create this content, if you like the visuals that you see, Ecamm Live is the platform that I use to do that, and I do highly recommend them if you're a Mac user. So I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you for joining me today for this conversation about boundaries. And remember, I want to invite you, start with one person, one boundary, or one situation, even if it's with yourself. Find one article to read, one TED Talk, one resource, something to share, and get ready to enjoy freedom, stronger sense of self, right? You're very strong in your identity. You're very clear about your core values. It brings so much peace into your life when your boundaries are clear. Have a great, great, great week. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to you joining this live next time as we talk about male friendships. All right. Bye, everyone. Have a great, great, great week. Talk to you next time.